Lena had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm under pressure. As a paramedic for over a decade, she'd seen more than her fair share of chaos. Car accidents, heart attacks, sudden deaths. She knew how to compartmentalize, how to keep her emotions in check, especially when lives were on the line. But the morning that everything changed, she found herself at the mercy of an unexpected and cruel force, something that had nothing to do with the emergencies she'd always been prepared for. It started like any other day. The soft hum of the engine as the ambulance sped down the quiet streets of Ashford Heights, a suburban neighborhood that Lena had gotten to know well over the years. She and her partner, Nadia, were on their way to an emergency call, a woman in labor. Nothing too out of the ordinary, just another day on the job. But as they approached the entrance to the gated community, Lena's senses began to prick. Something felt off. She could already see the security guard in his booth, watching their approach. They were still a mile away from the home, but something about the way he was standing, arms crossed, eyes fixed on them, made Lena uneasy. "We're running out of time," Lena muttered, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. "This baby's coming fast." Nadia glanced at her. "Don't worry, we'll make it." But as they pulled closer to the entrance, it was clear the gate wasn't going to open automatically. The system that allowed emergency vehicles quick access was malfunctioning. The light above the gate was flashing red, an irritating, stubborn reminder that everything wasn't running smoothly today. Lena's frustration spiked. She hit the horn, hoping the guard would see them and open the gate. But he didn't move. Instead, he reached for his radio, his eyes still fixed on the ambulance, and Lena's stomach twisted in disbelief. "Come on, man, we need to go," Lena muttered under her breath, her hand hovering over the horn again. Nadia was already on the radio, but Lena could feel the minutes slipping away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the security guard stepped out of the booth, his hand on his belt. He looked at them, really looked at them, before walking toward the gate. But then something happened that stopped Lena cold. He pulled out his taser. "Are you kidding me?" she whispered, shaking her head. She couldn't understand what was happening. All she needed was access. She had to get through. But there he was, the guard, looking at them like they were the ones causing the problem. "Open the gate," Lena yelled out the window, her voice sharp with urgency. But the guard just stood there, the taser still in his hand. It was clear he wasn't listening. Lena could see the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation. But why? Why was he doubting them? Why was he questioning their presence? They were the ones trying to save a life. Nadia jumped out of the ambulance and ran up to him, her badge shining in the sunlight. "We're EMS," she said, her tone firm but polite. "We have a critical patient, and we need to get through." But the guard wasn't moved. He glanced at the badge and then back at the gate, as if making a decision in his head. And that's when Lena saw it, the flash of something unsettling in his eyes. Was it fear? Doubt? Was he questioning whether they were really who they said they were? For a moment, everything went still. Lena's mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. They were running out of time, and she knew if they didn't act fast, this woman's baby might not survive. She grabbed her radio, speaking into it with urgency, but still, the guard didn't move. And then, the taser crackled to life. Lena didn't even have time to react before the electricity surged through her body. It felt like being struck by lightning. Her muscles locked up, her breath caught in her throat, and for a terrifying moment, everything went black. When she came to, she was lying on the ground, her heart racing, her body in shock. Nadia was kneeling next to her, her face pale, her hands shaking as she helped Lena sit up. "You okay?" Nadia asked, her voice strained. Lena tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, her chest tight. It took a moment before she could form words. What happened? The reality hit her like a punch in the gut. The guard had tasered her. He'd tossed a paramedic. A paramedic who was trying to save a life. I can't believe this," Lena whispered. Her voice trembled with a mixture of confusion and rage. How had it come to this? Nadia's hand gripped hers tightly, her eyes full of worry. We need to get to that patient. Forget about him. We've got a life to save. But Lena couldn't let it go. The electric jolt still pulsed through her veins. The image of the guard's face, twisted with doubt and fear, burned into her mind. This wasn't just a malfunction in the system. This was something deeper. Something broken. The guard stood a few feet away, his own hands trembling now, clearly realizing what he had done. But Lena didn't care about his fear. She cared about what had just happened. This wasn't just a bad day. This was something much worse. She got to her feet slowly, with Nadia's help, and they rushed to the car. But the moment Lena climbed back into the driver's seat, her hands shook. The door slammed shut behind her, and she started the engine, but the image of the guard's face stayed with her. They'd be back. This wasn't over. The ambulance sped down the quiet streets, but Lena's thoughts were far from the emergency at hand. The electric shock still hummed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of what had just happened, and what was yet to come. The woman in labor was still waiting for them. Lena had to focus, had to push past the lingering shock and adrenaline. But no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept returning to that moment with the guard. The fear in his eyes, the way he'd hesitated, then acted. She'd been tasered. A paramedic. It was like something out of a nightmare. The system, her job, everything she believed in, had just been upended in a single moment. Nadia, sitting beside her, didn't seem to have the same mental battle. She was already focused, eyes locked on the road ahead as they neared the neighborhood where the pregnant woman lived. The situation had changed, but Nadia's composure never wavered. "Are you okay?" Nadia asked, her voice quiet but concerned. Lena blinked, snapping back to the present. "Yeah, just..." She didn't know how to finish that sentence. How do you explain the numbness that had settled in, the overwhelming sense of injustice? How could she focus on a birth when she felt like she'd just been violated in the worst possible way? The truth was, Lena wasn't sure she was okay. The call they were headed to was critical. But for some reason, the gravity of the situation felt smaller now, swallowed by a much bigger weight. Something was fundamentally wrong, and it wasn't just the security guard. It was the whole system. Something broken had led them to this point, and if it wasn't fixed, the next time might not just involve a taser. They arrived at the house a few minutes later, and Lena shook off the unease as best as she could. The woman was in labor, her contractions coming fast, her breath quickening in panic as they entered the house. The couple's frantic faces made it clear, this was no ordinary birth.
Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment. It's easy for you and means the world to me. Watch till the end, and don't forget to check out the other stories on this channel. Let's dive in.
Lena worked fast, adrenaline sharpening her senses. They needed to get the woman to the hospital, and they needed to do it fast. She could feel Nadia's gaze on her, understanding without words, and the two of them went into automatic mode. The woman's husband stood by, pacing, occasionally whispering to his wife, trying to reassure her. Lena remained focused on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to be distracted by anything else. Yet, every so often, her eyes would drift toward the front door, as if expecting to see the guard standing there, watching them. His face kept resurfacing in her mind. They stabilized the patient, and as they loaded her onto the stretcher, the woman's husband gave them one last, desperate look. "Please, hurry." Lena nodded, her hands still trembling but steady in their motions. The woman was in good hands now. She'd make it. But as they wheeled the stretcher toward the waiting ambulance, Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out without thinking, swiping it open. It was a message from her supervisor. "Lena, I need you to report to the station when you get a chance. There's a situation I need to discuss with you. ****. Lena's heart skipped. There was no way this was a coincidence. It was too soon. Too specific. The taser incident was already on their radar. "What is it?" Nadia asked, noticing the change in Lena's expression. Lena hesitated. "I think they know." Of course they do. But don't worry. We'll handle it. Nadia's voice was reassuring, but even she couldn't hide the tightness around her eyes. She had seen the looks the security guard had gotten when they left. The doubt. The fear. By the time they reached the station, the atmosphere felt heavy. The tension that had been simmering since the taser was still hanging in the air. Lena wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. The station was quiet. Too quiet. There were fewer paramedics around than usual. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Lena walked inside, her feet heavier with each step. Her supervisor, Chief Reynolds, was waiting by the desk, his arms crossed. His expression was grim. "Lena," he said without preamble, "we need to talk about what happened today." She nodded, trying to steady her breath, but she could feel her heart racing again. "What's the problem, Chief?" "You know what the problem is," Reynolds replied, his voice low. "You've been tossed by a security guard while responding to a call. A paramedic shouldn't be treated like that. But there's more we need to figure out." Lena swallowed. I don't understand. What do you mean?" Reynolds looked at her with a mixture of concern and something darker, something she couldn't quite read. "This isn't just about what happened with the guard. This is bigger. Someone's been pushing for these security measures at Ashford Heights for months now. This goes all the way to the HOA. They're going to fight this." Lena blinked. "What are you saying?" "The HOA. Yeah," Reynolds said, leaning forward. "They've got money. They've got power. And right now, they've got a lot of influence in the community. This isn't just about you getting tasered. This is about a system that allowed it to happen. And we need to figure out who's behind it." Lena could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the world pressing down on her. It wasn't just a rogue security guard who had to be held accountable anymore. This went deeper. Someone had designed this system. Someone had allowed it to become so rigid, so inflexible, that a life was at risk. And that was only the beginning. Reynolds was right. This was bigger than she had thought. Lena sat down, her head spinning. If the HOA had been involved, it wasn't just about her anymore. This was a fight for something much larger, a fight against a broken system that had hurt her, and could hurt others, too. And she was going to make sure that no one else suffered the way she had. The next few days felt like a blur to Lena. The weight of what had happened, what was still to come, settled over her like a fog she couldn't shake. She kept thinking back to the security guard, Brad. His eyes darting nervously when he saw her badge, the way he'd followed orders without any thought to the consequences. And now she knew, it wasn't just one guard acting out of line. It wasn't just a bad decision in the heat of the moment. This had been the result of a system that valued rules over people. Lena couldn't stop replaying that moment over and over. Couldn't stop asking herself, why did no one stop this sooner? She had always trusted that there was a reason for every policy, for every restriction. But now she was beginning to see just how fragile that trust had been. The phone calls came in, one after another. Chiefs, union reps, even a few lawyers. They all wanted a statement, a public explanation, but Lena didn't have the answers. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain what she hadn't fully grasped herself? But she knew one thing for sure. Something had to change. And she would be the one to make sure it did. At home that night, Lena stood by the window, staring out at the street below. The lights from the passing cars flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. She thought of the woman in labor, the one who had been waiting for them to arrive. The birth had gone well, thankfully, and they'd gotten the mother to the hospital in time. That was the only success in the last few days, but it felt like a small victory in a much larger battle. The ringing of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Nadia. "Hey, how are you holding up?" Nadia asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Lena sighed. "I don't know, Nads. I feel like everything is unraveling. The whole system, the protocols. None of it makes sense anymore. And now, I'm starting to think this is much bigger than just what happened with the guard. Nadia was quiet for a moment. It is. I think we both knew that, but it's hard to admit. The HOA has been pushing these ridiculous policies for months, but this time, it went too far. Lena looked out at the street again, lost in thought. How did it even get this way? How did they get away with treating us like criminals? Nadia's voice lowered. It's not just about us, Lena. It's about control. They've built this wall around their little community, and they don't care who gets hurt as long as they feel safe. The security guard? He was just the tool they used to enforce their rules. But the real problem? It's the people pulling the strings at the top. And now we have to figure out how deep this goes. Lena ran her hand through her hair, frustration bubbling up. It feels like no one cares about the real issues. They just want to sweep it under the rug and move on. But people's lives are at risk. Jeanette's life was at risk because of these policies. And it's not just her. It could happen again. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Nadia spoke, her voice determined. You're right. But we have to do something about it. We can't let this go. We've got the truth on our side. Lena nodded, even though Nadia couldn't see her. But what can we do? I'm just one paramedic. You're just one paramedic. They have money, power. They can bury us. No, Nadia replied firmly. We're not burying this. If we have to go public, we will. We'll take it to the people. But first, we need to get the evidence. We need to dig into the HOA's policies, find out who signed off on all this. Who made the decisions that put you in danger? Who made sure that no one could get in or out without approval, even when lives were on the line? Lena's heart skipped. Do you think we can find that out? I know we can, Nadia said. We'll start digging. We have the public sympathy after what happened. We need to use that. Get the truth out, and make it impossible for them to cover up. Lena stared at the phone in her hand, her mind racing. She didn't know how she was going to do this, but one thing was clear. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't stand by and watch as the system that had failed her continued to hurt others. The next morning, Lena woke up early, her mind already focused on what had to be done. She wasn't going to let Brad's actions define her career. She wasn't going to let a broken system win. At the station, she began making calls. The first was to her union rep, who promised to look into the matter and see if there were any ways to apply pressure on the HOA. But it wasn't enough. Lena needed more. She needed to get inside. She spent the next few days combing through records, searching for anything that could help her. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but she found what she was looking for: a series of emails between board members of the HOA, discussing security upgrades and policy enforcement. The emails were vague, but there were enough breadcrumbs to suggest that Brad wasn't acting alone. This was part of a much larger effort to control who had access to their community, to shut out the very people who were supposed to protect them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As Lena sat at her desk, reviewing the emails, a thought crossed her mind. What if this wasn't just about security? What if this was about something deeper? What if the HOA wasn't just about protecting their community? They were protecting something else. Something no one had been willing to question. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. And with each new discovery, the picture became clearer. The question was no longer whether she could take down the HOA. The question was, how far was she willing to go to expose the truth? Lena's days became a blur of interviews, research, and sleepless nights. Every free moment she had, she was digging deeper into the HOA's practices, trying to connect the dots between Brad's actions and the people who had put those policies in place. Each email she uncovered, each document she found, revealed more about a system that was built to protect itself, not the people it was meant to serve. But as she dug deeper, the more she realized that the HOA was just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the one that could bring down everything they had built, lay much deeper within the web of political and corporate connections that she was only beginning to understand. Nadia was with her every step of the way, offering support when things got too heavy, even if it was just a late-night phone call or a quiet conversation over coffee. But Lena could tell that Nadia, too, was beginning to feel the weight of what they were up against. The HOA had money. They had power. And they weren't going to let anyone tear down their carefully constructed empire without a fight. "Do you think they'll back down?" Lena asked Nadia one night, her fingers resting on the keys of her laptop as she sifted through another stack of documents. "Not without a fight," Nadia replied, her voice thick with concern. "But that's why we need to be ready. We need to have all the evidence, all the proof. We can't just rely on what they say. We have to show the world what they've done." Lena nodded. She had always believed in doing things by the book, in following the rules. But the rules had failed her. They had failed Jeanette. They had failed everyone who had trusted them. The door to the break room opened, and Chief Reynolds walked in, his face tense. "Lena, can we talk for a minute?" Lena looked up from her laptop, her stomach tightening. She hadn't expected him to stop by the station so soon after their conversation. She knew he had been under pressure too, and the look on his face told her this was serious. "Of course, Chief," she said, pushing herself to her feet. Reynolds motioned for her to follow him down the hall, out of earshot of the other paramedics. He stopped in front of the office door and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I've been getting pressure from above," he said, his voice low. "From people who want this whole thing to go away. They want to make sure no one else gets hurt, but they also want this to disappear quietly. They're already talking about settling the case with the HOA. They want you to drop everything and let them handle it." Lena felt her heart drop. She had expected something like this, but hearing it out loud made it real. "Drop it," she echoed, her voice hard. "How can I just drop it? People died because of those policies. Jeanette died. I was attacked. This isn't something I can walk away from." Reynolds sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I get it, Lena. I do. But you don't understand the pressure we're under. If this goes public, if it gets worse, it'll be a PR nightmare. They want to make it go away, quietly. They don't want anyone poking around at what's really going on." Lena shook her head, her resolve hardening. "I can't just let this slide. Not when I know the truth." Reynolds looked at her for a long moment, his expression conflicted. Finally, he nodded. "I can't stop you from doing what you think is right, but I want you to understand, this could cost you everything. Your job. Your career. Maybe even your freedom. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests." "I'm already losing everything," Lena replied, her voice steady. "What else is there to lose?" Reynolds seemed to hesitate, and for a moment, it almost seemed like he was going to say something else. But he didn't. Instead, he gave her a brief nod and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Just be careful, Lena. This is bigger than you think." As he walked away, Lena felt a cold knot settle in her stomach. She had expected some pushback, but hearing it from someone she respected, someone who had always stood up for what was right, well, that stung. But it wasn't going to stop her. It couldn't. The days that followed were the hardest Lena had faced yet. She'd barely slept, spending most nights combing through public records, government databases, and HOA meeting minutes. She even enlisted Nadia's help, and together they started piecing together a damning narrative. A long history of illegal practices, violations of safety standards, and, most troubling of all, hidden connections between the HOA's board members and powerful figures in the local government. The deeper Lena went, the more she uncovered, an elaborate system of bribery and corruption that extended far beyond the gates of Ashford Heights. People had been paid off, policies had been ignored, and lives had been put at risk for the sake of keeping the community's reputation intact. But the closer Lena got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. She started getting anonymous calls, threatening messages that sent chills down her spine. At first, It was just one or two cryptic texts. Then the phone calls started, their silence ringing in her ears like a warning. And then there were the shadows. People watching her. The feeling that she was being followed. One evening, as she made her way to her car after a long day of research, Lena stopped in her tracks. Her eyes flicked toward a car parked a few rows over, the engine running. She couldn't see who was inside, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something wasn't right. She had to act fast. There was too much at stake now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Nadia. "We're getting too close. You need to be careful." Lena's heart pounded as she typed a quick response. It's too late for that. The world outside Lena's bubble seemed to move in slow motion. Each day was a blur of half-formed conversations, late-night research, and the heavy weight of the threats that loomed over her like an unshakable cloud. She was no longer just investigating. She was uncovering a web of lies, corruption, and misdeeds that had taken root deep within Ashford Heights, and, as it turned out, spread much further than she had ever imagined. Nadia had started to worry more. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and camaraderie, were now tense, hushed. Nadia's warning still echoed in Lena's mind. "We're getting too close. You need to be careful." Lena knew that she should have heeded it, but she couldn't stop now. It was too late. Too much had been revealed, and too many lives had been affected by the HOA's actions. That night, Lena sat in her apartment, staring at the piles of documents spread across her coffee table. She had managed to secure internal emails from the HOA, some of which made it painfully clear that the board members were more concerned with maintaining their image than protecting their residents. But it was the connection to the local politicians that sent a cold shiver through her spine. People in positions of power, people who had the ability to make laws that could change the lives of so many, had been secretly collaborating with the HOA for years. Lena's fingers hovered over her keyboard. There was one last piece to the puzzle, a meeting between board members and city officials that had been conveniently omitted from any public records. If she could find the transcript of that meeting, it would confirm everything. But she wasn't the only one looking for it. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Nadia, and the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. "You need to leave. Now," Nadia said, her voice strained. "I don't know how to explain this, but they know we're onto them. Someone's been tracking your movements." Lena's blood ran cold. She glanced out the window, half expecting to see shadows lurking in the streets below. "Who? What are you talking about?" "I don't know, Lena. But someone's been inside your building, going through your trash. I'm telling you, we've crossed a line here. It's not just about the HOA anymore. It's about them protecting themselves. They'll do anything to stop us." Lena's pulse raced, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "What do I do?" "Get out of there. I'm coming to pick you up. We'll go somewhere safe. Just don't stay in your apartment." The phone call ended abruptly, and Lena felt a surge of panic take hold. She had known the risks. She had known the danger. But somehow, hearing it from Nadia's frantic voice made it real. Grabbing her laptop, Lena threw it into her bag, along with her phone and any files she could grab in a hurry. Her mind raced as she glanced around the apartment. Her whole life, all the work she had done, could be wiped out in an instant if she stayed. The hallway outside her apartment was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Lena's footsteps echoed in the otherwise still building as she hurried down the stairs, her breath shallow. She knew she had to get to Nadia, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she stepped outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap to the face. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Across the street, a black SUV sat idling. Its headlights were off, but the engine was running. Lena froze. The SUV was too close to her apartment for comfort, too close to be a coincidence. She quickly ducked into the alleyway next to her building, trying to stay out of sight. Her heart pounded in her chest. Just as she reached the corner, her phone buzzed again. It was Nadia. "Lena, get out of there. Now." Lena didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted toward the end of the alley, only to hear the unmistakable sound of a car door opening behind her. She didn't dare look back, but every fiber of her being screamed at her to run faster. By the time she reached the main road, Nadia's car was there, waiting for her. Lena dove into the passenger seat without looking back. The car sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. Lena's breathing was ragged as she turned to Nadia. "They know, don't they? They're coming after me." Nadia's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles white. "I think it's worse than that. I think they've already got people inside. People who are willing to do whatever it takes to protect the HOA." Lena's mind reeled as she tried to process the words. "What do we do now?" "We fight," Nadia said firmly, her voice steady. "We don't stop. We take this to the press, to the people who can make a difference. But we have to be careful. There are eyes everywhere now." Lena nodded, but doubt lingered. She had been so sure of herself when she started this journey, so confident that the truth would prevail. But now, with everything escalating so quickly, she couldn't shake the fear that they were too small, too vulnerable against the forces that had already set their wheels in motion. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena and Nadia worked tirelessly, gathering the last pieces of the puzzle. Lena knew it wouldn't be long before the people behind the HOA's corruption came for them. But she couldn't stop now. There were too many lives at stake. They made plans to meet with the media, to get the story out there before the forces aligned against them could silence it. Lena's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Nadia. It was an unknown number. Her finger hesitated over the screen, but she knew she had to answer. "Lena, this is Jonah. I have something you need to see." Lena's pulse quickened. She knew Jonah. He was a reporter with an impeccable reputation for exposing corruption. But she had no idea how he had gotten her number, or what he was about to tell her. Lena sat in the dimly lit coffee shop, her hands gripping the mug so tightly her knuckles were white. Jonah sat across from her, his eyes scanning the room as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. He'd been quiet ever since Lena answered his call, but the tension in the air was thick. He knew something she didn't. "You said you had something for me," Lena said, her voice low. She couldn't afford to waste time. Every minute they delayed could give the people behind the HOA another chance to cover their tracks, to erase the evidence she had worked so hard to uncover. Jonah's eyes flicked toward the door one last time before he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I've been talking to some people. People who have connections. People who know things." Lena's heart raced. She had learned to trust Jonah over the past few weeks. If he had something, it could be the final piece of the puzzle, the smoking gun that would expose the corrupt forces behind the HOA and bring them to justice. "Go on," Lena urged, her breath hitching with anticipation. Jonah paused, glancing at the entrance one more time, then slid a manila envelope across the table. "This is a recording from a private meeting between the HOA board and local politicians. They were discussing how to deal with public backlash after Jeanette's death. They didn't care about her or her family, they just cared about saving face." Lena's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope. She knew that what she was about to hear could change everything. Slowly, she opened it, pulling out a small device, a recorder. Her eyes flicked over to Jonah, who was already standing, ready to leave. "You should listen to it alone," he said. "But don't waste time. The clock is ticking." Without another word, Jonah turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Lena alone with the damning evidence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pressed play. The voices on the recording were distorted, but the message was crystal clear. The HOA board members were laughing, casually dismissing the importance of Jeanette's life, focusing instead on how they could control the narrative and prevent the fallout from spreading. One of the voices, a politician, mentioned how they could get rid of any inconvenient evidence, any troublesome reports, and ensure that the tragedy would be swept under the rug. Lena felt a wave of nausea hit her. The same people who had told her to drop the case, who had tried to convince her to let it go, were the ones who had been pulling the strings all along. They had known about Jeanette's death, and they had done nothing but protect their own interests. She hit stop, the recording now etched in her memory. She couldn't waste another second. She had to act fast, before they knew what she had. Lena grabbed her bag and rushed out of the coffee shop, her mind focused on one goal: getting this evidence to the public. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The stakes had only gotten higher, and the people she was up against were powerful. But it didn't matter anymore. Jeanette's death had to mean something. It had to matter. She met Nadia outside, her face pale and tense. "We have it. The proof." They knew about everything. About the cover-up, about Jeanette, about all of it. Nadia's eyes widened, but there was no time for celebration. "What do we do now?" "We get it to the press," Lena said, her voice determined. "We go to the right people. We can't let them silence us. We have to make sure this goes public, and it can't be stopped." Nadia nodded, her hand trembling as she pulled her phone from her bag. "I know someone at the Times. If we get this to them, it'll break. It'll have to." Lena and Nadia rushed to her car, the weight of the moment heavy between them. As they drove, Lena's mind raced. What would happen after this? Would they come for her? Would they try to silence her? She had no way of knowing for sure. But she knew one thing: she couldn't turn back now. Once they arrived at Nadia's contact's apartment, the journalist barely had time to let them inside before they were huddled around a laptop, uploading the file. The reporter's fingers flew across the keys as she set everything in motion. Lena's heart was in her throat as she watched the screen. "Is it going out now?" "Almost," the journalist replied, her voice tight with focus. "Just a few more minutes." Lena's stomach churned with anticipation. This was it. They couldn't stop it now. The screen blinked, and a notification popped up. "The story has been submitted to the Times for review." Lena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. But it wasn't over yet. The wait would be excruciating, and there was always the chance that someone would try to shut it down before it could go live. But that was a risk she was willing to take. The following morning, everything changed. The headline in the Times screamed across every news outlet: "Exclusive, cover-up by HOA exposed, how political corruption and greed led to a fatal tragedy." The article detailed every hidden connection, every illegal transaction, every decision made behind closed doors that had led to Jeanette's death. The story went viral, with social media exploding in outrage. People were furious. The victims of the HOA's greed, residents who had been ignored or mistreated, came forward to share their stories, their voices united in condemnation of the corrupt system that had tried to destroy them. The fallout was swift. Politicians who had been involved were forced to resign. The HOA board members were placed under investigation, their once sturdy reputations shattered. The community of Ashford Heights, once a fortress built on secrecy, was now a battleground for justice. As the truth came to light, Lena's phone buzzed with notifications. People were calling her a hero. But she wasn't interested in the praise. Her heart was heavy as she thought about Jeanette. She had done this for her. For the people who had been forgotten, ignored, and silenced. She had never wanted fame or recognition. She had wanted justice. But as Lena looked out the window at the city, she realized that justice had its price. Her life would never be the same. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but it was a fight she could face with strength, knowing that she had done the right thing. The story of the HOA cover-up became a turning point, a moment in history that would not be forgotten. Lena had faced the truth, no matter the cost, and in doing so, had changed the lives of many. Justice had been served. And the community, broken but strong, would rise from the ashes of corruption and deceit.